Hey, good day everybody, and thank you again for being with us on Tim Kelly's Master Photo Techniques. I've got a topic to cover today which has to do with this light. Spotlight, we call it often, and it can do that job, but its bigger job is much, much bigger. And I want to show you exactly what it does. Spotlight itself used to illuminate a portion of a background or some other area. But the real title for this particular tool should be background luminance. And that's what I'm going to show you today is how I use it, not for the sake of a spot, but rather to balance out the elements in a scene, to reduce contrast in different areas or gain contrast in different areas. It's really quite deep and quite complex. So let's take a look. My light, or grid spot, better than spotlight, is made with a honeycomb grid on top of or in front of the light source. The diffuse light source, if you want to, there's all kinds of devices you can use to get the look. I found that the medium one that fits my photogenic is really the size that I stick with all the time. Most manufacturers have grid sets that fit them perfectly. So mine is also suspended from the ceiling, and that makes it easy for me to position wherever it need be. That should, however, not limit you. You can put your grid spot on a stand off to the side, and it will work just great. But right now we're going to look at what it really does. On this first portrait, you see that the light, the luminant background, is behind the subject on the shadow side, or the subject's shadow side. It's never a rule to be left, right, top, bottom. It just isn't. It is positioned where it needs to be. In this case, we are lit from the right in kind of a nice little profile. This is kind of a Madam X by Sargent kind of a feel. But what matters is that there's extra illumination behind the shadow side, which really separates the body and the hair, and therefore on the opposing side you have the darker background against the highlight flesh. That's what brings balance. That's what gives us all the necessary edges. Nothing falls off into darkness. This beautiful image of Whitney, my bridal, which is also videotaped with some behind the scenes, I think. Can you imagine if the lighting pattern was reversed, or if the background illumination was reversed? In other words, what would this look like if our brightest background was over here next to the bright hair, bright veil, and bright face? And on the opposite side, you would have darker flesh shadows, hair shadows, against darker. It wouldn't pop out very well. You need that dynamic of light against dark, light against dark. And that's why this works so well, is because of the background balance that allows you to compose off-center and dynamically and diagonally. A recent favorite, a fine art image made on a large film, 8x10 film. First, of course, tested with smaller, but then we did it. And it has double spotlight feel on it, just because you didn't want to have just this light down here without some counterbalance. This is the normal relief to shadow side, but in this case we wanted the entire background, floor, everywhere, to be a variant, but still of one kind of tone, so that the subject, the old man with his drum, stands out so beautifully. So this is not accomplished with one light or two lights. This is accomplished with background control, and I hope you can see that there. This one's extremely obvious. It was done some time ago on Polaroid film, PN55, black and white negative. And this one, very obviously, I remember clearly, this was lit with sunlight coming in my studio, so as not to have a natural fall off and shadowing in here, we put our spotlight, our grid spot right here to balance the whole image out. making the separation of hair to background equivalent to flesh tone to hair to background. Very, very successful. Very intentional as well. This one was called Flowers in Her Hair, and the subtlety of this one is what I want to point out. Even though the shadow side subject is the right, the background on the right is lighter, but not by very much at all. Just a tiny little kiss of extra luminance so that it would balance the difference here, the dark to light to dark to light. This is the important part right here, and that's where the spot was put to basically give a control and a rhythm that you can't get without it. Obviously here in this one, the boy's portrait in high key, the lighting was used on the upside to kind of place their faces between highlights here in the background, highlights here in their shirts. So we put them in the middle of that space. And really, you could make a portrait of just the heads or just the 3/4 length. A very successful full length because the posing is so cool and so natural. But the lighting is done intentionally up here, kind of balance out the white shirts. Because if this, imagine again, this is an imagination test. If your background had gone darker on top, not much darker than this, but darker, your eyes would first go, they would first go to the shirts. So to make sure that didn't happen, we put a balancing illumination up here. Hopefully you can see that. Here's a more recent image. This one is done with 2 lights. The grid is lighting down this way. The other characteristics of the background is built in, the modeling. And then we have extra lighting coming over on this side too, so that we diminish the power of the bright white in the garment. And we see first her face and head against a darker field. So this area intentionally lightened so that you would go first to view the face. So now we're going to take a look at my inspiration. It's not photographers, it's really painters of old that gave me kind of an insight into doing this. So we're going to look at a number of pictures. Actually, they're just black and white photocopies that I made long time ago of instances where background control made all the difference. A lovely classical, English style portrait. But what we've got here again is lighting from the right, and then we have the extra luminance on the left, which is the shadow side. And because of that hot spot and the garment, what do we look at first? We look at their faces because they are in a field of darkness. They are the area really of greatest contrast, less the dog, the silhouette of the dog, but it's not really a primary subject, it's a secondary subject. Works really well though. Another one that is, well, that's a good view, I guess. Another one where the background is, in this case, is painted in brighter to bring balance, because once again, you've got this giant whitish dress or very light dress and the 2 heads. How do we diminish the dress and bring importance to the other areas? We put another very bright area there as well, and then we get to go first to these faces. That's just the way it happens. It's the background. So it's not a spot for the sake of a spot. It has a very deep meaning and purpose. This one, very, very much the same principle. We have a broad light from the right, making the left half of the image our shadow. And in the brightness of the background, we have an opening that allows us to not give much credence to the lighter pants or the big collar, but we go again first to his face against a dark field. And then if we want to see his hat, it is against a light field. Works very, very, very well. And of course, these are beautiful color paintings, but graphically, this is what's happening. You can do this kind of background control with color too, but essentially luminance is the main ticket. Let's look at a couple more. Love this one. This one inspired me a lot in my early days of portrait photography of kids. Composition's really interesting, and I especially like the fact that there's this wide, bright opening on the top left, which really gives us a great balance to the brother, and with that white dress there. If he was in the dark, you know, you'd see the dress first, and we just don't want to do that. But this is really brilliant, and really love it. But it is an intentionally painted or lit area of the background. This is one of my very favorite images graphically, but also in color. It's by George Romney, English painter. And I've seen the original in color, beautiful, of course. It's only like about 24-inch painting. It's a smaller painting in the scale of things back then. But let's think about what's happening. A girl in a white dress with a big dark bonnet, okay? We do want to see her face. We don't want our eyes to be taken to the dress as a primary subject. And we also don't want to look at the dark hat as a primary subject. So next to the hat is darkness. If you look at the background from top to bottom, it gradiates, and the darkest part is behind the dark hat. That makes it diminish. The lighter background is against the dress or the bottom part of the dress, which keeps our eye from studying there, just the way it works. It's a beautiful, soft, broad lit with a mysterious missing light on her eyes, but it's a gorgeous portrait, and the example is brought to you here because of the background tones. They totally work. Same thing here. Dark hair, so we have darker background behind it, so we can enjoy the face. The dress, the garment is very light, therefore lightness is brought all around it so that its importance is diminished. Yeah, here's Sargent right here. Again, here we're getting some more gentle uses. We have a portrait that's lit from the left, the way we see it, and the shadow is on the right, hence the background on the far right is lighter than that on the left. So what you can see here is the highlight of the face, shadow of the face. Hair is going to be quite deep, but the background is reopened with light. Could have been a natural scene, you know, but the light is actually coming from the other side. So in my world, in our photography, we can choose to make sure that we can see the separation of the hair and the figure or the face, whatever it happens to be, against the adjacent background. It's always about what things are next to, okay? Same thing. We have a beautiful face against a dark field. We have, in this bright area of the book and hands, we have a lot of luminance back here. And that is to downplay the brightness. If you'd shot this image or created it against a flat, low-key background, your eye would go hands and book, collar, and then the face eventually. But by lighting around here, we don't look at this as much importance. Beautiful image. Also, the gradient of the background. I mean, the artists that painted these can use colors and they have complete freedom. But why do they continually choose to gradiate the background in favor of the subject standing forward? So in this case, we want to enjoy mostly the face surrounded by dark hair. This needs to be the greatest contrast, and it is, because when we come down to the bright garment, we have a brighter section of background. It's subtle, but it starts dark, medium, medium light, you know, so that it pops off very nicely. One of my all-time favorites right here, as far as having a tool for a lesson on this subject. This could be recreated today in the studio. Now, if you didn't have the light striking the wall behind his hand, it would be such a standout area. It would just pop out and you'd see it first. In the old competition days, we would have said, oh, burn it down or oil it down or darken it down somehow. But in reality, there's no reason why his hand can't be as bright as his face. I know that's competition rules, but the way you can win, and I always have with this stuff, is because you know your zones and you know that what's next to something causes you to look there or not look there. So we have a beautiful face and hair, well lit against a medium background, stands out very nicely. The pose is great, shape is great. I like the background graphic, but with that hand out here, it would normally be a problem. But if there is a light, in my case, this would be a grid spot behind his hand so that the whiteness of his hand was no longer a distraction. Do you feel that? It would be a distraction if the background was one single tone of dark gray. The hand would be just competing with the face. But by changing the background luminance behind his hand, you get to enjoy full luminance on his hand. This is, very weighted with your particular desire to make things subtle or grand or high impact, but control is what we're talking about today. Here's an interesting one. I think this is a Whistler. It's, of course, a color painting, but it's really more monotone or duotone really. I've always liked it for a couple reasons. I liked that the paintings, the things on the wall were muted back so they didn't distract. It reminds me a lot of what a photographer named Bob Becker from Florida in the 80s did, and you should look him up because he did this kind of thing in real time before digital. He would take elements of a room and paint them or mask them down or whatever so that they didn't stand out. He just wanted this figure to stand out. The thing I always noticed about it is that people using like posing devices and chairs and benches on a lighter key, you would always see the legs and the back. That would be such a distraction to have this architectural form of a chair stand out. So what this painter has done was created a wall, wood or whatever, a wainscot or whatever he's got here, border. So this dark runs right through this third so that this is not a distraction. So really brilliant in a number of ways. Softly lit, natural, but I love the mutation of the other elements on the wall and the fact that the confusion of under a table, under a chair is negated by the dark that goes through here. Really genius. And you can see how I've employed the same techniques. All right, I put the hot background next to the hotter dress area so that we really do study this area first. We've taken the elements of the chair, put them very much next to the other dark so that they don't stand out that much. Here we've got beautiful light, window light feel from the left, and we reopen the background on the right for balance. If this exact image was stripped out and put against a plain gray background of one tone, it would be very stagnant, and now it is not. Love this one, same thing. It's a medium low key, and we're lighting, of course, from the left, and we're composing a large, tight horizontal, something that in itself is different and therefore gets attention. So compositionally, it's very strong, but what makes it not sit still is the luminance on the background. Quite intentional. If your main lights are here, hitting him, you can't let natural fall off just make you one dimension. So this is the use of the grid spot. Same thing here. strongly lit with 2 or 3 lights from the left, and then we reopen the background against the shadow side so it stands out well. Same thing here, very, very soft opening of the background. In this bridal portrait, which of course was originally created in color, digital, when I made my black and white, I felt it rendered really well because of the multi-tones of the background that are all kind of throughout the image. Very, very soft, magical feel. And I feel like the balancing of the background tones totally worked to take us where we want to get to view. And she already had a win right here in the face because we have her highlight, mask of the face, surrounded by darker. It was already a win. Same thing here, just a seeing your image. And this was shot with the luminance low, the glow down here to diminish the flesh of the arms. You know how somebody that's even beautifully fit, bare arms can be a problem. They can be a problem. If this background was dark, you'd be looking at her arm. But by lighting it near to the tone of the flesh, it kind of disappears, which is a great trick anytime you have somebody in the studio that you want to diminish some areas of flesh, be it arms or hips or something. You just put something of the same value next to it, and your eye will no longer go there. This V shape of her dress takes us right to the face. It's kind of got some life and excitement in it, but it is the contrast right here that makes us look where we need to look. This one lit on top, really, and shadow side. You know, as you can see, that's where the gradient is. But it's so that we can see the edges of her form and her hair and not have a flat background. The reverse, lit from the right, lighting more so to behind her on the left side. It's important so that we can see the separations everywhere. Dark against light, this is a good example right here. You know, dark against light, light against dark right there. And she looks great in that set. This is an older piece, but very intentional. Oh, even in a full length, we have the lighting on the shadow side so that it has more dimension, more depth. Simple senior, lit from the upper right, extra light in the background. Senior, same thing, very delicate. This value, however, is darker than this value. So, lit from the right, opening the shadow side. Gives you great rhythm. This background has, this is really cool because the background, I positioned him so the darkest area of the background was against his highlight flesh. Then, just like in the bare arm situation, if you don't want to see as much of that attention-wise, put something lighter next to it. So we lit this area so it would soften that. And then we have the extra light up here to separate his face and shoulder, arm here from the subject. Again, if you can imagine, one big softbox coming from our right and any background, it's going to be darker here and you won't get a good sense of separation. And another high school senior, same thing, lit from the left, hot on the right. This one has the lighting in the top, and this is a natural background with the blue, which matched nicely, but it was still lit. It was still lit extra so that it would have the strength to stand and allow me to create this composition. This is kind of an everyday use of the system, if you will, of lighting over the shadow shoulder. It's probably the most common use I have for this, and that is we are lit from the right, beautiful modeling on his face, but we put the spotlight back here to further separate and give dimension to the image. If it was just a flat background, you wouldn't have that. That's what can make these things so painterly and so full dimension. So I hope you enjoyed or at least got some really good information out of this segment on my grid spot use, spotlight, background luminance, The importance of it is it's just another tool. It's like painting with light. You're just deciding that a certain area needs to be lighter for a certain reason. And you now know mine is to give dimension, to create contrast or low contrast areas to keep the eye away from an area. And you could study this over and over and practice it for a very long time. But it is an essential ingredient to making portraits of like a world-class artwork where you are in charge and you just don't have to let a background be what it is. You can modify it while you're shooting, not just later in Photoshop. So, thank you for being with us. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll see you again here on Master Photo Techniques.